I grew up with this sound because my father's a sculptor as well, so he was a school teacher and the studio was just outside our bedroom window and he'd carve furiously during the school holidays or at night time, piss off all the neighbours. So we always heard the sound of the mallet and the chisel. But I didn't quite get his facial expressions down yet. Every photo of him carving, it's like man versus wood struggle. We've got 25 days to finish this, so. That's one of the intriguing things about this Biennale, is the theme is foreigners, strangers everywhere. So there's very much a focus on, Adriano Pedrosa very much focused on migrant populations, populations who have been displaced, and telling their stories. So in the context of Venice now, it's more than appropriate to tell those stories, Indigenous stories. I mean, you're going to the heart of Europe, really. So it's not like we need validation by going to Europe, but this certainly seems the platform to tell some of those stories. We were essentially invited by Adriano Pedrosa, the curator, on the last day of March. So right from that time, we've been furiously working on this. So it's been, 7 months? But yeah, as I say, that theme of strangers everywhere and putting the highlight on issues to do with, tangata whenua is basically the context for this. But he also likes telling stories that haven't been told by groups like, all sorts of minorities. Like this work, he wanted me to make a work that responded to the work of my father. And so it's shown in the context of my father. And also he was intrigued by the connections between that generation, first generation of contemporary Māori artists like my father, and Selwyn Wilson is in the exhibition, and Sandy Adziet as well, and Europe, So because their work obviously incorporates elements from Europe, modernism, if you like, as well as tell stories from here. So he'd been here before. He judged the Walters Prize. He learned about that story and became quite intrigued. So that's why in Arsenale he wants to make reference to Māori art, Indigenous art, that had responded to what was going on in Europe. Well, not necessarily responded to, but certainly taken elements from that as well as their own culture to create something new. So this will be shown in proximity to my father's work.
There. That one. It's based on flounders, the triangular shapes of flounder fish. Tangaroa being the sea god. These two particular pieces show, on this one, Te Reo riding the whale and to New Zealand, and the other one is based on Maui. He is snaring the sun. And this also is the shape of the sun. And there's Maui and there's the whale here. It's never been my intention to be an artist, because, I was well aware of that saying, when you say you want to be an artist, and people say, what are you going to do for a living? Because in my case, I thought. But I think I was an artist purely by accident, because even though I had the ability to draw in that, I just assumed that, you know, when you can do things well, you just can't understand why others can't do the same thing. I mean, I could never understand why the guys in my class at school, why they want to throw crayons and everything around in the art room, you know, and by the same token, they couldn't understand why I was having problems with algebra and so on, because they could do it and I couldn't. And so on.
This pattern is called taratara kai. And one thing that's interesting about it is it's used throughout the Pacific. So you see this on Tongan war clubs, you see it in Hawaii. It speaks very much to the Pacific.
And why did you choose this pattern?
It's about abundance because it comes from the story of Tiniro. Which is about a whale, and one of the other interesting things about that story of Tiniro is it's also throughout Polynesia. The first thing I wanted to do is a homage, if you like, to my father and his work. Obvious thing is to look at the physical elements and respond to that. But then I actually looked deeper at what he was saying and talking about, and he talks about the Tiniro story, he talks about Tangaroa. There was originally another work about Te Rā, the sun, which isn't in it now, but they were all talking about nature.
In the old days, because Maoris had no language, or written language, the only way that they could express themselves other than by their voices and tone of their voices was to carve, and to carve their stories in wood, because that's the only material they had. And so I've tended to sort of still use that idea of telling a story using a sculpture. And that's why my work probably differs from a lot of other people's work, because you know, they have a concept or an idea and they do it, whereas a lot of my stuff is retelling stuff that's already known, but just making the young people aware of these stories that are out there that belong to us.
The name is called Wastelands. It's a response to the Wastelands Act 1858 and similar acts, and also New Zealand Company deeming land as wasteland that was valued by Māori in order so they could sell it cheaply. Oh, sorry, they could buy it cheaply and sell it later to immigrants. Yeah, Wastelands, I like the title because there's no word in Māori for wasteland that I know of, because all land was valued. It's essentially a pasaka on wheels that's covered in tuna and eels to tell those stories, which is read in the context of my father's work and a homage to his work, but also uses eels and talking about a resource that was valued by Māori that's been diminished with a privileging of pasture land over wetlands, to use that story and tell that story as a way of representing the voice of tangata whenua, Indigenous people, and privileging these stories in the context of strangers everywhere, foreigners everywhere, the theme of the Biennale.
His work probably goes deeper than mine. You say here, to be Brit is to be, I think that he's an academic. So he looks at things in a far more complex way than I do. You know, he's very good at languages, and he has a different way of looking at things, which I encourage. You know, because and he has his problems on how to interpret what he wants to say, and so that I respect that. You know, it's true. But his work is very different in lots of ways from mine.
One of my parents is Pākehā and one of my parents is Māori, but I'm always interested in that meeting point between the two cultures and the tension that's created between them. Not saying that I lived with a lot of tension, but, you know, just always having to negotiate between two cultural spaces growing up. So that's why I'm so intrigued with that, and it's probably reflected in most of the work I do. Always been intrigued with that period where Pākehā, more and more Pākehā were coming into the country, and how Māori absorbed those new ideas into their culture. So even though that was the intention, I felt quite uncomfortable when I first put the wheels on the pātika for the other work. But it was sort of an expression of the coming together of those two cultures and what that meant. Because the pātika, of course, is, as I say, it used to be the pride of the tribe was the pātika, the focal point in the village, and it was, you know, obviously on stilts, and it was raised, and it was an expression of the tribe's wealth, you know, having a pātika like that, and the carvings chosen for it well before the meeting house, which is sort of a modern concept. The focus was on the pātika. So what happens if you take a pātika, which is about stability, about the mana of the tribe, and then you put that on wheels? So it's making reference to the fact that during the 1860s and so on, in that phase when Pākehā numbers started to equal Māori numbers, the tensions that were created and the migrations that occurred because of that. So you had migratory populations. So it's a reference to that sort of period of instability, if you like.
Here the two here, for me anyway, in this particular piece, once you start creating a few shapes like this, then everything else takes over in your thinking, and it creates itself rather than me saying it should be this or should be that. To me, as far as I'm concerned, it just happens. One shape decides on the piece that's next to it, how it's going to look. I found that I really enjoyed sculpture rather than painting. Even though it's, you had to, in lots of cases, it's a 3D thing, so the sculpture has to look good from all three sides or four sides. And whereas painting, it only has to look good from one side. And it was pretty obvious from my attitude that a lot of my sculptures are ones you can hang on the wall that only requires, because they tell a story. But now I don't do a lot of that now. I tend to stop. All the stuff I do now tends to be three-dimensional, and now because I do a lot of outside stuff. It's done in stainless steel, because wood, cracks and so on, and requires painting and what have you with stainless steel and corten steel and so on. They last far longer than wood.
Are you happy with your life's work?
Yes, yeah. It's I am really. It's helped me to a lot to keep on my Maori side.
I always like looking at colonial mythology, and in most colonial accounts of the country, they always begin with saying that there was nothing here but swamp, especially in Waikato. They always talk about how there's nothing but swamp. And of course, those swamps were not just swamps to Māori, they were, a whole wealth of resources, wetlands. And sort of eels or having a constant supply of eels was like a gold mine, to Māori up and down the country. So you read these colonial accounts of the swamp, and it's sort of denying the fact that wetlands were such a valuable resource. And so, when I'm paying homage to the just so-called swamps, and food resources that were valued by Māori that weren't valued by immigrants, such as the eel and all the wealth of resources that used to exist in the wetlands.
If you look at all his work, so we've got big works of his here. It's all big, all, I would have been content with half a dozen eels. You get a whole lot of, like he made a comment where there are no eels because of the swamps have all been drained and so on. And I said to him, well, you shouldn't comment because you've got a hell of a lot of eels there sitting on your wagon here that should be in the swamp too.
seeing the space and imagining that your work would be in the space, you know, is a different thing. So it was a dream to actually see the work in the space. And where it's all positioned in the arsenale, you know, we're quite lucky. They're in the first 2 rooms of the arsenale. So it's with Mataaho, and then we're in the next room. So, I mean, it's a huge privilege. Yeah, it's a big work. There's no getting around it. But the thing is that we had never put it all together, painted and carved at home, which of course is what you should do. So I'd never seen the whole work together. So it's quite a thrill to see it. Oh, well, like a lot of my work, I try to make it appeal to their senses, whether it's through the scale or the carving. That's the thing with big sculpture, how it responds to your body. The response that it has on your body is quite important, as opposed to, you know, other media. So hopefully they'll respond to that and make the connection with my father's work. So Adriano Pedrosa wanted me to make a work that sort of that responded to my father's work. Dad's style it has overlaps with people like Paramacha and his generation, Cliff Whiting, where they were sort of contemporising Māori forms. Yeah, so my first response was to make something that looked like those works. And then I thought, no, I have to be sort of true to my own visual language. The overall theme in his works was nature, our pūrako about Maui and the sun, slowing down time. You know, what does that really mean? You know, or the whole story about Tiniro, which set the precedent for so many of our behaviours today, whether it be the whare tapere, whether it be utu, or a lot of these things came from that story about Tiniro and his relationship with Kai. So they're all there. It's funny, just telling those stories, it doesn't seem that revolutionary, but for that generation it was, because those stories were ignored and they weren't out there. So just in the same way that Ngāti Glavish, by saying kia ora, which seems commonplace for us today, was like a revolutionary act, and she lost her job for it in those days. Even just telling those stories was revolutionary for them. And then his other works, Whiti Te Rā, which is a homage to Te Rauparaha, but all, you know, to the haka, is there. And then the other work that I love is Ngā Tamariki a Tangaroa. It's a homage to Tangaroa and the oceans. And of course, even though they relate to our stories about nature, of course, they're so relevant today when it comes to climate change and those things affecting us now. So when I arrived, the crates were there, and then they put my father's work up. So we've been working in the space. And of course, I grew up with those works. They're all from the 70s. So I grew up with the works literally in our house and friends' houses that we'd visit. So it was like, you know, they're like visiting old friends. So of course, immediately I felt safer in that environment. And it was great working the whole week and then looking over and seeing these works there. Although it's funny because one of the works, as I say, I grew up with as a child, and I thought it was huge. And then I saw it and it was, you know, half the size that I thought. And I went so far as to actually write that it was 2 meters. And so of course the Biennale went and pressed that, you know, I'd got the dimensions wrong, but, you know. But, you know, as a child, I look at these and had huge admiration for my father and his work, of course, completely brainwashed. So I'd see these and, yeah. But as I say, it's like seeing old friends.
You know, I've always said I've had my time in the spotlight. Now it's his turn. You see, so I'm quite happy to. Well, I'm not quite happy to ride off in the sunset yet, but you know, I'm quite. Sit back and watch now and just done my thing. I said to my wife, you know, I suppose history will remember me as being Brett's father. Yeah, but, however, it doesn't worry me anymore.